welcome to another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. Now, I say another edition of the podcast, but not really. Today, it's very different. Usually, we record the podcast in a radio studio. Today, in a television studio, because this is a very special occasion. Today, we have as our guest Dr. Sebastian Mahfood, who is the reason why the podcast even began. And he is the director of WCAT Radio, which carries all of our these podcasts as well as so many others. So, Dr. Mahfood, it is our very great pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Ray.
So this is St. Paul's Letters to America, and it is the program in which we ask a simple question. What if St. Paul were alive today? What if he were here in America, or at least was alive, and could see what was going on in America, and felt compelled, based on what he was seeing in our country, to write us a letter? What would he tell us? Well, we know the answer to that. Not that we think we know the answer to that. And the reason why we know the answer to that is because he wrote the truth. The letters that he wrote to the Galatians, the Colossians, and so many others expressed the truth. And the truth does not change. Now, today, a lot of people, you may not actually believe this, but a lot of people don't even believe in the truth anymore. They don't even believe there is such a thing called the truth, or that you can identify the truth. But it is there, for the simple reason that there is a God, and the truth is an awareness of Him, His creation, His purpose, His individual plans for each one of us. So there is a truth. The only question is whether we can see it, whether we can understand it. So how do we know? Well, we ask questions, and that's what we do in this podcast. We ask questions, and they're usually, always, in the context of a letter from St. Paul, as is going to be the case today. But before we do that, I want to introduce Dr. Mahfood again, because not only is he the director of WCAT Radio, but he's got he's got something else that keeps him a little busy, and it's the reason why he's here today. So perhaps you could tell us. You are the director for the Institute
for Theological Encounter with Science and Technology. So ITEST is an institute that was founded in 1968 by Father Robert Brungs, is a Jesuit father, who was an incredible source, an incredible inspiration for our understanding of a complementarity between faith and science, at least in the St. Louis region, for over 40 years. And he died in 2006, and the organization continued under the leadership of Dr. Thomas Sheehan, who served as director until 2021. And then he stepped down, and I think I was just the last man on the ship.
You were the last person? You were the likely candidate? You were the only available kind of person?
I'd say it was one of those instances where you're in a room and people are saying, who could be the new director? And then somebody points to...
that guy over there in the corner.
He just stepped out. Let's elect him. And when he comes back, we'll surprise him with the announcement. So that's it.
So you've been the director now for...
For about a year and a half.
Okay.
So, and before that, I was on the board for maybe 12 years. I joined the board in 2006. So however long that is, that's 16 years now that I've been involved with the Institute for Theological Encounter with Science and Technology.
So the objective of the Institute is to explore, to stress, to spread the word about the fact that there is this complementarity between science, technology, and what I've called the truth. There is a complementarity with the divine plan, the divine order.
Absolutely. So we're losing a lot of Catholics. We're losing a lot of Christians to agnosticism and to atheism because they believe science has all the answers.
And that science, is opposed
and that it's
to faith.
Yeah, that it's diametrically opposed to faith. Because if you can demonstrate something through science, then you don't need God to explain it. You can say, oh, well, this happens scientifically because of evolution, or this happens because of how DNA works. And they say, well, if it's possible for us to explain it in natural terms, Why do we need to resort to the supernatural, for which there's no empirical evidence?
Right.
And so they call themselves, or we would understand them as material reductivist, people who reduce everything to the material reality.
It's what I can see, what I can touch. And if I can't see it and I can't touch it, it's not real.
Then it doesn't exist. That's right.
So, you could be wondering, well, would St. Paul have anything to say about this? Would he have anything to say that would be relevant to this? Well, as a matter of fact, he wrote that ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Yes, there is a divine order. It's plainly apparent if you're at least open to it, and you can see that there is so much more, that there's got to be something behind, what has come to be. How has this all come to be? But anyways, so St. Paul believed that. St. Paul believed that from the world that was just in front of us, you could perceive a divine order to things. And so that's obviously the question that everybody that's involved in the Institute explores. So how many people are involved in the Institute? How do you spread the word? Or how do you explore these questions?
Well, we have several hundred members who are in the Institute for Theological Encounter. I'll just call it ITEST to save the...
I got that.
Yeah. So we have about 300 members. We have about 1,700 people on our mailing list. We have some meaningful partnerships. We have 30 bishops in our membership. We have a lot of priests. And we're connected with other organizations like the Magus Institute, Father Robert Spitzer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure.
So, and he's come and he's done webinars for us. He put together a presentation several years ago that we continue to make available. Stephen Barr's Society of Catholic Scientists has been very helpful to us. In addition to the partnerships we have with other organizations, I'm constantly looking for more people involved in the faith and science conversation to help spread that message of complementarity between the worlds of faith and the worlds of science. St. Augustine is purported to have once said that the book of nature and the book of scripture are written by the same author. And you get that from Genesis even. At the very beginning of Genesis, we've got God creating everything in an order. And we are part of that order. We're part of the natural world. And we're part of God's creation in His image and likeness. So understanding that is something that that people of faith have understood for thousands of years. Just that alone, that the natural world has a creator. It didn't create itself. And we can participate in that creation, in that act of creation, in the life of our Creator, simply by cooperating with grace, which God freely provides. Many people like to walk around with umbrellas because the ocean of grace and mercy is pouring on their heads constantly, but they got to be me, so they hide.
Yeah.
So the faith-science conversation, the complementarity between faith and science, is an important thing to express, an important understanding to share with others. And that's what ITEST does in terms of sharing its message and extending its message to the world. We do it through our bulletins, to our membership. We do it through webinars. We try to find interesting people who can have this conversation, who have organizations through which we can extend our message. And we have them come on our show.
So perhaps now's a good time to ask this.
Sure.
But if somebody wanted to watch any of these webinars, how do they do that?
If you go to our website at faithscience.org,
Faith Science.
Faith
Not
Science.
Not Faith and, just Faith
Just Faith Science.
.org.
We kept it simple.
Simple's good.
Yeah. So faithscience.org, we have all of the webinars there. And every time we do one, we do it through Zoom. We record it. We post it on WCAT TV, another one of our partners. And then we share it through our network. We share it with all of our bishops, with all of our priests, and with all of the people in the organizations from which our speakers come.
Now, do the people that participate in these webinars, are they all religious, or some of them scientists, or what's the makeup? Do they come from different, fields?
They do come from different fields. So when Father Brungs began an annual conference, and this is what we base the webinars on, he used to have people come from different perspectives within a particular tradition, a particular faith tradition or particular science tradition. And he would ask them to share their views with one another, and then an audience that had gathered would be able to ask them questions. And so that's how we started the webinars. We would have people come who would express their understanding of how science or a scientific process works, physics, some of the hard sciences, chemistry, biology. And we would have somebody else say, okay, well, what about these things? And it would likely be a theologian who would enter into that conversation. And at a certain point in the conversation, they are expressing the complementarity of faith and science. And that's...
At certain points in the conversation, things converge?
Things converge pretty much at most points in the conversation.
Really?
It's the recognition that they're converging, which is what happens at specific points in the conversation. They say, oh, wait a second, this what you're explaining as a scientific process is not at all at odds with the faith. It, in fact, helps demonstrate that the faith is coherent and cohesive.
So are there some eureka moments? I mean, are there people, for example, who might be participating in this that kind of get maybe surprised by the fact that these things sort of coalesce?
And that's when you see the questions pop up in the chat room.
Uh-huh.
And during the Q&A, the presenters will go through and they'll address those questions. Mm-hmm. And it's in that engagement with an audience, with people who are saying, well, wait a second, let me put you on the spot for a moment about this or that, where the insights are evident, mm-hmm. In terms of how the audience is able to find within this encounter between faith and science room for growth.
All of a sudden you can just see, or maybe in the text message or the chat room comments, just sort of like see the wheels turning.
Or sometimes you see it turning in the participants themselves.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, that's an interesting thought. Let's explore this a bit. Yeah,
so I take it you've seen a number of these. Are there any that, seem to be memorable, or any of these that, come to mind? I know I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here.
Oh, I don't mind being put on the spot.
Okay.
We started doing the webinars as a regular occurrence after COVID hit. In 2000, suddenly the world found itself on Zoom. And the world learned how to use video conferencing software. Prior to 2000, you would send a WebEx or you would send some kind of invitation to somebody to join a show. And you really need a lot of technical support to get people into the mindset of, okay, I'm going to join a show in this way. That was the first thing. Mm-hmm. And these are the technical things I need to do to get on the show. Mm-hmm. Zoom made it easy. Zoom was a link. You tapped a button. You were there.
Right.
Zoom, from a presenter point of view, not that I'm doing a commercial for Zoom, by the way, but just the software itself is what enabled this to happen. Allowed us to invite people into a show, to mute their microphones so we didn't have the distraction coming from any ambient noise
Right.
that might be in their environment.
Right.
It gave us the opportunity to record, and even the opportunity to throw people into break rooms if we wanted to do breakout sessions. So there was a lot of useful aspects to this technology. But the most important thing was it was simple. So in 2000, I did a show, and I invited a couple of speakers to come and talk, and we gathered an audience. I thought, wow, that went over really well. We had about 40, 50 people show up. Let's do it again. So within another month, I had another show put together. So memorable ones, we did a show on the in vitro fertilization just recently. in what it means, for people to engage in that kind of activity, whether there are moral implications, is there a moral dimension to it? What does our faith say about it? Dr. Marian Urlakis was one of the presenters on that show. We did one with Dr. Elizabeth Rex, where she came and she talked about frozen embryos and embryonic transfer and whether or not it was licit. In America, we've got millions of frozen embryos because of the in vitro fertilization. What you do is you fertilize a lot of eggs, and you implant a few. And then those that you implant, you select which ones you want to keep based on their positioning. And those that you don't want to keep are aborted. So if every person, if Dr. Seuss is right, in Horton Hears a Who, that a person's a person no matter how small. If every human person who is alive has what would be considered by the scientists who perform IVF a fungible identity. That is, there are 6 embryos implanted. We don't like 3 of them, or 4 of them, or 5 of them. And so it doesn't matter which one it's all a matter of luck as to which one implanted best. Then what does human life mean? What does it mean for us to be sitting here today when we could have been otherwise a victim?
You're fungible.
Of this fungible identity, you know?
Yeah.
So shows like that, shows that talk about life and talk about our human experience, are those that are most memorable to me. We have lots of shows that talk about physics, and we have speakers like Dr. Tom Sheehan, who are very articulate in these programs. But the ones that talk about life have the most meaning to me, simply because of my I'm part of a pro-life ministry called Life Runners, which is run by a man named Pat Castle, who was on the board of iTest. I was able to recruit him, who was instrumental in helping our society understand that decisions like Dobbs versus Jackson are the right decisions. To overturn Roe v. Wade. We've been working on that one for decades.
Well, now you're talking my language.
Well,
from a legal question,
yeah.
That one is, because the thing about that decision that actually, it gets a lot of people animated. It's a scientific issue. Well, it deals with a scientific issue. It gets a lot of people animated, but really what it's about is human freedom.
Right.
When you talk about, a life in the womb, it's about human freedom. The fact that unborn child has a right to freedom, has a right to live. The Dobbs decision recognized freedom. It simply took the decision on this very controversial, from a societal point of view, controversial or hotly debated issue, and put it in the hands of the people instead of 9 guys in Washington, D.C. who nobody elected to their office. Mm-hmm. And so, that's it. It's one of the things that we talk about on the podcast often enough, which is simply this idea that, humans have this dignity, humans have a freedom, and it's funny that that should cause so much consternation in people, like when you recognize freedom.
It's in our Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. All men have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. Liberty is freedom, but before liberty, you need life. Mm-hmm. We've been talking about that for over 200 years, 250 close to. So why it should be a surprise to anyone that should be a central tenet of our existence as an American people.
But even in this, it seems like we're just at random sort of touching on a certain issue, and even in this, you can see the complementarity. Yeah. Because, is the desire for freedom, is the satisfaction that we get from being free, is the angst or the disturbance that we feel when we're not free, is that part of our created human nature? Is that part of the order of things? That's because this desire for freedom, that's not something you can touch or you can see, but it is real, is it not?
It's an effective argument against material reductivism,
There you go.
against scientism,
There you go.
which would reduce everything to the material world.
You use big multisyllabic words for me, so I don't know. That's a little disconcerting.
I get most of my multisyllabic words from my good friend Dr. Gerard Verschuren.
That's a good name for him to have, Dr. Gerard.
It is, yeah, it is, isn't it? Gerard Verschuren is one of my authors. So in addition to my being the director of iTest, I also own a publishing house. And I published almost 300 books. It's 294. I'm going to hit 300 this month.
This month?
This month.
Oh, very good.
And I'm going to have my King Leonidas party. 300. We are Sparta. So Gerard Verschuren is responsible for, I don't know, maybe a dozen of those books.
Is he really?
And he's about to do a webinar this month called Faith That Makes You Think.
Okay.
And it'll be a broadcast on WCAT radio and WCAT-TV. But you, if anybody would like to come to that webinar, I know I'm dating the show at this point, please go to faithscience.org and just register. And it's going to be an incredibly enjoyable experience to hear him talk about faith and science. He's a geneticist, is his background. But he says, look, everything we know about science teaches us there's God.
Well, it's funny because Dawkins is a geneticist as well.
He considers himself to be an evolutionary biologist.
Okay.
So, at a certain point in whatever agenda you've got, whatever ideology you're pushing, there's an agenda behind it. And so whenever somebody talks about something that is just, oh, well, we can demonstrate that there is no God because evolutionary processes take a long time and we've got enough time to be able to demonstrate this. And if we get into wiggle room, we can always say, well, maybe there's multiple dimensions. At which point
we just make up the philosophical, like an alternate order, an alternative reality, just to make up for the gaps that we have in our explanation for things.
And given that there's no empirical evidence for things like multiple dimensions, or for any made-up philosophy,
the people who stress the empirical
are incoherent.
Well, then all of a sudden use the non-empirical when it suits them.
Right. Yeah. So that's what makes our faith very coherent. I mean, we can demonstrate that there is a creator. If there's certain things we don't know scientifically, we're not going to throw ourselves back on scientific eschatology, which is, eventually man will figure these things out. Yes. We can simply say, God created the world for us to explore and understand. By discovering the world, we can encounter God, because this is a place that He's given us in our flesh and our bones to explore and understand. In fact, Stanley Yaki, an incredible theologian, Jesuit father, and an incredible scientist, once said that Christianity is what made modern science possible. And the reason is Christianity taught us that there was an order to all things. And therefore, it gave us permission to explore that order. And once we started exploring that order, science followed.
Yeah.
Everything we do empirically is a discovery of the incredible and wondrous creation of God.
The capacity to reason and explore these things and discover these laws of physics and so forth. I mean, that's all because of the intellectual capacity that came from where? I mean, it just came from out of nowhere. I had a discussion with somebody one time, and they fell back on that defense that you were talking about. Well, science will discover the answer. We don't know the answer yet, but that's only because we haven't had enough time. Eventually, science will come up with the answer. And the question was, okay, but what happened before the Big Bang? And the Big Bang, of course, was, again, you talk about the complementarity between, faith and science. I mean, my understanding is that the Big Bang theory owed its origin to a Catholic priest.
Father George Lemaitre.
And he was not put off by such theories, or that I'm sure didn't, disturb his faith. Mm-hmm. But this one gentleman that I was having this debate with one time, said, well, we don't know the answer to that yet. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang, but science hasn't discovered it yet. And I said, well, the question is really, and I don't know if this was from Aquinas or I was borrowing this rationale from, but it was like, well, how do you get something out of nothing? Because if you didn't have matter, universe, you didn't have the material universe before the Big Bang, and then all of a sudden you did. So before the Big Bang, you had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there was something before the Big Bang, then well, where did that come from? But if there was nothing before the Big Bang, that means that the Big Bang created something out of nothing. So how does that happen? And he just fell back on this defense that you mentioned. I said, well, no, it's not a scientific question. It's a philosophical question.
Right.
These are ideas. Nothing, something. How do you, can you have one come from the other? And he didn't really want to engage in that discussion because I think people are so now conditioned to think, well, science will explain everything. I can stop thinking.
Yeah. Proponents of scientism are like proponents of any ideology. They don't need to know the answer because exploration of that ideology may expose its flaws. So they're perfectly fine to shrug their shoulders and say, well, the scientist will figure it out. I don't have to worry about it. At which point you say, well, wait a second, but are you comfortable landing there? Are you comfortable not wanting to move further? And you find a lot of people are like characters in Plato's dialogues. When Socrates would ask them a question, well, where does virtue come from? What is a virtue? They're comfortable falling back on bromides and platitudes because the moment that they start thinking about what might be a real response, what might be at least something that would be adequate enough to put Socrates at bay, they have to uncover a truth about themselves. And it's a blow to their pride.
Yeah, or it's just maybe part of the explanation is they're a little afraid of it because now you have to take some responsibility for your own life. If you have to think, what is the purpose of my life? Whereas if you just fall back on science, and well, I don't have to answer that question. What's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? These are philosophical questions. And if you think everything is explicable by science, why don't I have to answer that question? I don't have to worry about that. And as you say, but are you comfortable with that? Because, okay, what's the meaning of your life? Don't you want to know?
That's a key point. What's the meaning of our lives? If our lives actually have a purpose, then we're responsible for living that purpose. But that gets in the way of our hedonism.
That comes with consequences. Yes.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
We want freedom without responsibility.
Right.
And to accept freedom in the sense that even you're talking about, in terms of the human person is that we have a fundamental right for freedom. To accept for that fundamental right, to accept freedom and to own it, we have to be responsible.
We have to be responsible, and there's a consequence to that as well, because then if you want that freedom for yourself, you have to be willing to acknowledge it, for other people as well. And if other people do things or say things you're not really in favor of, well, maybe you don't want to allow them so much freedom that you want to have yourself. It's a nasty thing when you demand that things have to be consistent.
There's also a fear of this new phenomenon in our society, cancel culture. People may be afraid of pointing out, I really don't want to use gender pronouns, for instance, because they're afraid they'll be canceled. They're afraid that they will awake a woke community, as it were, to scrub them out. And we've seen this in some instances. The one that most clearly comes to mind is that high school student who was at a pro-life march in Washington, and an Indian, somebody representing.
You're talking about the Covington High School.
That's it.
Student.
Representing a Native American came up and harassed him, and he simply stood. He didn't do anything. Now, 1 million people show up to Washington, D.C. every year, and there's no real news coverage. The media is not focusing on, oh, look at this outpour of support for the pro-life movement. But they zeroed in on one isolated event, and that became the pro-life march, at least as far as the media was concerned.
Right. So, and this cancel culture that goes on, it brings up that question again of freedom. This is intellectual freedom, the ability to, think for yourself. No, you have to say certain things. You have to conform to a certain way of thinking. And if you don't, then you get canceled. And so the issue again there is human freedom, human dignity. What is the value? What's the meaning of a human life? What's the value of a human life? Another philosophical question. And those philosophical questions, they have to be able to correlate to scientific discoveries. If it's all part of, a coherent whole. And if all of this world and all our lives in this world are not part of a coherent whole, well, that's a pretty depressing thought.
Well, it's those of us who are in both the faith and science conversation are seeking that coherent whole. We could, like the scientific ideologues or those proponents of scientism, I don't want to demonize anybody. I mean, I believe everybody is a work in progress. I'm a work in progress.
We're all on a journey of faith. We're all on all
Absolutely.
kinds of life journeys. Yes.
So if we look at something, those of us who are part of this broader conversation that tries to understand our faith as complementary to our science, and our science is complementary with our faith, we are going to ask those harder questions. We are going to explore those areas where, it might be we don't know the answer. And we are going to at least acknowledge that we don't know the answer in our faith. That, okay, there are some things that God has done that are a mystery. Take, for instance, the Eucharist. Is God present? Is there a real presence in a consecrated host? Mm-hmm. We believe there is, but we also believe that there's a mystery behind it, as in all mysteries, that we will never fully understand. Saint Damien in Dante's Paradiso meets him in the seventh sphere of heaven and says, the beauty of our faith is that we get to grow eternally, eternal spiritual growth in the mind of God. But no matter how big we get, we'll never plumb the mind of God.
There's always more to understand, always more to explore. Yeah,
God's deep. But yeah, so we will be able to explore our faith in everything in it. And that includes this understanding that the supernatural has formed for us a natural world in which to reside, in which to inhabit. So,
in this discussion of the supernatural and the natural, what's the response like with people in the strictly scientific community? Have there been occasions where you've tried to invite people to participate in a webinar or somehow engage in the discussion that maybe are reluctant? Is the people that you run into, the people that you come into contact with, are they open to this? I suppose there's no one general reaction or one general description that you can apply, but
we've been really good about getting people to respond positively to participate in our events. Even when they can't make a certain date. We're trying to put together a webinar for a particular date. We do them on Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. Central. And some people are traveling, some people have whatever, and they say, I can't do the date. And I say, well, would you pre-record something that I can post as a way to invite people, who want to watch the pre-recording into actually participating in the webinar? And I've had a great deal of success. It's nobody says, no, I won't do it. I had one person who had a distaste for the activity itself, the engagement, and it was because we were Catholic, and because she was concerned that she would be used, I guess, as a poster child for something. It was Norma, Jane Roe's daughter,
Oh,
who lives in Texas.
okay.
She said, I don't feel comfortable doing this show. But I was inviting her to participate in a show where we were going to be talking about abortion and about the Dobbs decision, and about the impact of that on the overturning. So of Roe v. Wade and what Roe v. Wade meant for 50 years. I mean, these children of Jane Roe, Norma McCorvey, did not share the same philosophy. In fact, when I was reading about this one, she didn't even know her mother was involved in the case until she was a teenager. So that's the one instance I can recall where I reached out to somebody and I did not get a good response. But
You know how that must have been like for somebody. I mean, you're a child of, the woman who was, really the catalyst for 50 years of abortion. Would that be, a little, I don't know, disturbing to your inner peace? I mean,
well, her mother repented. Her mother
did, yeah.
Yeah. And that is right there itself an opportunity for conversation. You suddenly see the consequences of a decision like this, and 60 million babies dead in this country. It's over 500 million worldwide. With the way that we export the pro-abortion activities, the pro-choice activities, in education programs that come with Planned Parenthood solutions.
Right.
The final solution. Oh wow, if this is going to be inconvenient for us, let's just kill it. And
Right.
and it's not just with a matter of inconvenience. It used to be, what is it? It should be safe, rare, and legal. And now it's more, this is our right, and we should be able to do it whenever. And I don't even think it needs to be safe anymore, because you can have doctors who are not doctors performing these procedures. So, I mean, where's the medical review? I mean, you point this out to a pro-choice person, they've got responses already ready for all of these considerations, where we say, well, wouldn't that get in the way of? And they go, no. Isn't that incoherent with? And they go, no. So I just admire Pat Castle in the work that he's done for helping clarify how a pro-life position is much more coherent in terms of life, liberty, and happiness.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of times a rational discussion is not quite so welcome, because there are a lot of inconsistencies that you can point out in the pro-choice position. And so that's why I was wondering, like, when you try to get people to get to be engaged in the discussion, I mean, I'm sure that there, it's be some people that wouldn't be quite so open to that. But people that are, intellectually honest, yeah, I'm sure they would have no problem. Yeah, let's explore this. Let's discuss this. And of course, that's really the only way anybody ever really grows, or
through exploration of topics that may be uncomfortable, particularly when they affect who we perceive ourselves and our identity. In a world of identity politics, there's lots of ways to hang your hat, as it were, metaphorically, on a particular identity, and die on that hill. To just mix some metaphors.
Right.
But if we can truly see ourselves as who we are, our identity is not based on a particular ideology. It's not based on a particular ism. It's based as children of God. That's our identity. So what we do with that identity in terms of exploring those areas of our lives, those areas of our thought that are at variance with our identity, our true identity as children of God, created in the image and likeness of God, that's what will help us grow spiritually and personally.
Well, and on that, I mean, when you think about it, the Catholic theology, Catholic philosophy, way of looking at life, you talk about the Eucharist, all of it relates to, all of it involves to some degree this idea that we're all part of one large group. We're all part of this human family of Christ. We're all connected. We're all united. Whereas if you look at things from a purely biological point of view, and we've got no existence other than just what happens by happenstance, we're just a bunch of molecules and physical elements and so on and so forth, then we've got no responsibility to anybody. We really don't. We're not part of a large human family. Some people could be more important than other people. Is that really true? Is there a truth in that we're totally disunited? Or does it feel more right to think that, no, we are all connected? And if that feels more right, well, then why? Why are we all connected? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, to agree to that, you'd have to agree that mankind has a common nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment you agree that mankind has a common nature, you suddenly say, wait a second, would there be a law, a natural law, that would oversee that? Something with which we who have a common nature can participate. And then you're suddenly held accountable.
Well, from the famous stories I like to tell, it's a Eucharistic miracle story. It's about a gentleman named Andre Frossard, and he described himself as a perfect atheist, which meant that he didn't bother wasting his time talking about whether or not there was a God, because the answer is so clear it's not worth wasting your time to even discuss it. And he had a friend of his who went into a Catholic church one time, and he said it was going to be a few minutes. Well, his friend took too long, so he followed him into this church in Paris, 1935, at 5:10 on a certain afternoon. And he came out of that church at 5:15, saying that he was Roman Catholic and that he'd always been Roman Catholic. Because everybody is Roman Catholic. Why? Because there is one Christ. Because all of humanity are the children of Christ, that there is a God, and we're all, these sons and daughters of this one God. It's an approved Eucharistic miracle. I mean, that just doesn't just how did that happen? Well, he walked into the church that he happened to walk into was a church where they practiced perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. And he had just this amazing mystical experience that he describes in a book which is not that easy to find these days. It's out of print and so forth. But it's one of these stories that is just so amazing. And, again, that speaks to the fact that we are all united. And, that's a wonderful question to explore with somebody who would believe solely in a scientific, empirical view of things, that believes, well, no, there's nothing other than what we can see.
Right.
But that's again where the philosophical has to meet the scientific, and that's what you're all about.
Well, that's grace. If Andre Frossard looked in the direction of the Eucharist, mm-hmm. and was so profoundly impacted by his experience, that mystical experience with the divine, which is what a mystical experience is. If he looked in the direction and suddenly he was prompted to cooperate with the grace of God.
Oh, he saw it was an absolute gift from heaven, because he saw what he describes. It's a beautiful description, and he says, words can't describe it. But even the words that he uses to try to describe it, they're just beautiful. They're just beautiful. But it was an absolute mystical experience where he saw what person standing next to him would not have seen,
sure.
Perhaps because he was given this particular grace, he was given this particular blessing. So, but anyways, so what? Now that you've been director now for a couple of years, what would you say if I was asking like what feels most rewarding, or what feels rewarding to you about this particular role? What do you think the place of the Institute is? What does it contribute? How do you personally, I guess, sort of, feel about the job of the Institute?
I can see myself being director a very long time. When I first accepted the responsibility, it was a responsibility. I was like, well, seriously, there's 12 of us on the board here and nobody else wants it. But as I've grown into it, I've started mapping a lot of my other activities around it. So I own a publishing house, En route Books and Media. I've started publishing a lot more books that deal with the complementarity of faith and science. And if you go to enroutebooksandmedia.com, I've even got a section, Faith and Science, where people can explore the books that have been published just in the past couple of years. My radio show, my radio station, WCAT Radio, I've connected it with iTest. So it is the platform that produces all the webinars and actually hunts for scientists in the world of Catholic scientists to be able to come on and talk about things that they're exploring in terms of their faith and in terms of their scientific background. And so iTest is the beneficiary of these other entities that I have. But these other entities that I have are growing because of iTest. Just our membership base alone, our newsletter base, it's only 1,700 people. It's not as impressive as the Society for Catholic Scientists, but because of our partnership with the Society of Catholic Scientists, because how we are able to plug into their activities as well, it gives us a much broader audience. So I guess a challenge for the next several years is bringing in to our conversation those people who wouldn't naturally be a part of our conversation. It's hard to find theologians that are not accepting of science, at least in the Catholic world. Mm-hmm. There are probably many of them in other Christian faith traditions that may look upon science as, or even philosophy, as something they don't want to explore because it would go against their faith, or it might say things that make them uncomfortable professing their faith. It's a lot more often the case that you've got scientists, like Andre Froussard, for instance, mm-hmm. who are so heavily involved or deeply involved in their paradigm that they don't want to express anything that might reek of the supernatural.
That's where it takes on the science, the attachment to science almost takes on like a religious kind of a quality to it. They believe in it.
They believe in it, and it's the science you can believe in.
Even if, and you say, well, yeah, but how about we discuss something from this angle or that angle? Well, that could perhaps upset something they believe. So now we keep that away.
Right. Well, and if you're basing your science on belief, then you're demonstrating at least the capacity to be a believer.
But that's where we get into those inconsistencies again, where you can, you ward off so-called belief, but nevertheless you practice, a belief kind of a system.
Yeah.
This idea of the fact that we're united and such. So there's a human nature. There's an ability to bond with people. I ran into a guy at a conference not too long ago, and this is a conference where there were a lot of scientists, a lot of engineers, a lot of geologists, a lot of scientists, and and that's not my background. But anyways, I was having a conversation with somebody, and he basically didn't believe in God. He believed in a God, but it was the clockmaker God.
So he was an agnostic.
He created created the universe. He set all these laws of physics in motion. Stands back. Doesn't love people, care about people. Very detached. And he believed in the golden rule. That we all ought, needed to be good to one another and so forth. And I challenged him on this. And originally he was very hostile to me because, and I warned him. We're starting on a certain discussion, and I warned him. I says, look, if we're going to talk about this, I got to tell you, I'm very religious. I'm very faithful. And what I'm going to be saying is going to come from that perspective. And he surprised me because he wanted the discussion.
Okay.
So, then we started on this, and so I challenged his notions. And I said to him, I said, at first he was very hostile to me because he said, well, you people that are all very religious people, you just want me to join your faith. And if there's somebody from a different church, he's going to want me to join his faith. And I got to believe what he believes. And this other person, and I'm just not, you've all got, there's 1,000 different truths out there, and you all think yours is the one, et cetera, et cetera. And so he's very hostile. Mm-hmm. I said, no, it's fine. I mean, I said, you believe what you want. I said, it's okay, and I think he was, afraid of like being judged. I'm like, no, you're fine just the way you are, but here's something to think about, et cetera, et cetera. And at several points, I tried to stop the discussion. Okay, well, because I was thinking maybe this is too much, and he's like, no. So he wanted to continue this discussion. He was hungry for it, and I think the difference was, if I had to guess, the fact that he felt this acceptance. I wasn't judging him.
Yeah.
No matter that he didn't believe what I believed. It was okay. He was okay as a person, because I had this, and I told him, I said, look, if you go looking for the answers, you'll find the truth, because I've got this confidence that there is this truth, and if you do go ask, and you shall receive, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's what connected us. So it was a personal connection. It was a connection on a human level. There was he felt, I guess, in a certain form, love, right? At least, you don't judge, you don't, you accept, but you accept without conditions. I mean, it's even on that level, I guess, a form of extending love to somebody. Well, if that was the reason that we connected, where does that come from?
That's it. It's a relationship.
Where does that sense internally,
right,
that another person accepts me, and therefore I feel drawn? Where does that drawing? I mean, you talk about it like almost a gravitational pull. How about that one? We just worked a little science in there. But anyways, so we're just about out of time, and I'm going to make an offer to you, if you would
Sure.
like. Perhaps you could close us out with a prayer.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Lord, thank you for this time together. Thank you for the presence of your Son in our lives, and for our understanding that it's through our relationship with you that we are able to have relationship with others. And through our relationship with others, we're able to demonstrate our love for you. So please continue to help us extend our mission, which is ultimately one of evangelization. It's ultimately one to proclaim the glory of the gospel, of the glory of your Son, through the Gospels to the world, as he asked us to do. So please also help us with the intentions in our hearts, in the intentions of all of the viewers of this video, that we may continue to grow in our faith and in our love of you and of our everyone, even those, especially those who don't agree with us on many things. With all this we pray in Christ's name, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Dr. Mahfood, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you come back and listen to another episode. Until then, God bless.